Well, hello, I'm Hotep, and welcome. I'm Mogg Morgan, companion of Set and Knight of Shambhala. I think I'm going to add as well new neighbour, which is the Morgan Witches, which is a kind of glamour that combines a lot of the different elements together. I should say as well that because of the interest, I've got quite a lot of interest in this material, which is quite of star clocks and quite difficult to get into and find right information about. I've actually put together a book now with material from the 4 lectures I've done so far, but an awful lot of other material about virtually a guide to all of the different types of star clocks and astrological lore from Egypt, together with what you can do with it. What you can make of it. The uses of it, which I think is quite important. I always try to put something like that towards the end of a film, even if it's quite technological. And another bit of news, I suppose, is that we had a Thelemic symposium last year, a revival of a long tradition after a decade of silence or more, and there's going to be another one. There's going to be a Thelemic symposium, so that's a real in the flesh meeting of magicians talking about some very interesting issues, a whole conference with demonstrations and all the rest, and that's in Oxford again on the 28th of September, so plenty of time to get organized for that. And also the day before that, because that's a Sunday, in fact, we had the date we could get for the use of the theatre was the Sunday, which is not so bad. So it left us open to the idea that we could do something on the Saturday. So the Morgan Witches, we're going to have a sort of workshop on the Saturday afternoon before the conference. So if you're coming to the conference, it'll be a good opportunity if you're going to make a weekend of it and have a little holiday and in what is a kind of interesting place to visit, then you can come to our workshop and we may well do some social things after it. There's usually some sort of social event in the evening, getting some food and chatting and stuff anyway. So we could sort of merge into that and see what else we can do. Okay, so that's the business stuff out of the way. So for this fourth thing, a last section on the decans for now anyway. Although, as I say, I've opened up a whole can of worms, as you say, and there's all sorts of other people, other aspects of stellar lore in Egypt that people want me to explore. And as I put the book together, I quite likely will record different aspects of the book when it's done. It's nearly done. You could email me at mandox2000@yahoo.com. I might put a link up here as well if you want to pre-order that, which would be helpful. Or certainly if you want to just express an interest, so I know how many people might be interested in that. Various editions, might try and do a color edition as well, which can be a bit expensive, but we'll have a kind of standard edition as well. Okay, so please get in touch if you're interested in any of those things, and we'll do what we can. Okay, so as per usual, I'll probably get my animation of the cycle of the decans from Egypt, the Egyptian version, running as a kind of background motif throughout the whole of this film. It sort of moves slowly through. Well, I say slowly. It takes about 6 minutes, I think, to go through a 24-hour cycle of the decans of one particular time of year. Of course, it would have been spiraling in a way, right? It would never quite come back to the same point because it's got the movement of the whole year. So it comes back to the same point after about 365 days, of course, roughly. Something like that, depending on which way you model these things. Anyway, I'll leave that running. as I think it's quite a helpful thing. Okay, so we talked about star clocks in tombs and star clocks in temples, and the decans, and how they were in later times especially took on a more demonic aspect to them. Perhaps it was already there, but certainly about halfway through the timeline this becomes much more emphasized. By the end of the Egyptian culture and the Roman and before that the Greek era, the decans have definitely taken on this demonic aspect, which is what gets passed on to the Western mystery tradition through various Byzantium and India and all sorts of avenues into our modern intellectual tradition. So for this one, we're just going to talk about them in a slightly more personal context, as they were placed on the side of coffins. And obviously, some coffins are the coffins of the king, and they're extremely high status, amazingly complex, elaborate objects. Sometimes the star clock is actually painted onto the walls of the tomb, but presuming that most people might have had quite a simple tomb display, because it would take quite a lot of marshalling for a draftsman to kind of put this together. But so there's a compact version, if you like, of all the mysteries of Egypt, kind of painted onto the tomb, or onto the coffin, or carved on there of a stone. But usually we're talking about something that's wood with paint, far more easy to manage and copy from manuscripts. So as I say, it was a common practice in these in coffins to put all of the magic that you might need and all of the liturgy that you might need in the afterlife to make this sort of transformation, to reconstitute your consciousness in some way, and to then re-manifest it in another way. Everything you needed to achieve that very human goal is painted on the side of your coffin. That's the idea. So these are really essential magical texts, and not surprisingly, they often have a star clock painted there. Not always the most obvious. People know about the books of the underworld and all the rest, but the star clock, it looks like a list of quite obscure things. I'm showing a few examples of them, which I'll edit onto this film later so you can see that. The first decan list, the list of the first decans that have survived, whether other versions of it might have survived on the walls of tombs or whatever, but it is the coffins, those on the side of coffins, which are the earliest examples that have in effect survived from that time. The early decan lists, when they talk about the early decans, we're talking about kind of middle kingdom, and also the first intermediate period, very early on, about I think about 9th or 10th dynasty then. And I'll put some dates on, if you like dates. I'll let it walk across the screen as a text thing. So it's very early on, and there's no reason to think that these were the first, that the system was developed for those coffins. It's quite likely that it was a longer tradition that went back, although as it happens, that particular moment in time was also a very productive moment for the creation of a lot of magical techniques. The first intermediate period, if you like, when the Egyptian society kind of fell apart, and people felt very paranoid and very kind of hemmed in by cosmic forces, essentially. And so a lot of the ways to counter that and to fix ourselves in space and time were developed in that moment. So very early coffins from the first intermediate period, a time when a lot of magic was invented. And the coffin is only the the example, one of the, I think there's a sample I've got as a photo is the second oldest example. I think there's a few older than that, but they might be quite fragmentary. And it shows the decans there in a very simple form, not the elaborate pictures that I showed last time, or the elaborate descriptions. Pretty much just a just the image of a star, literally the image of a star. This familiar five-pointed star image that it is kind of occurs all over Egyptian tombs as representing the sky. So an image of a star, and then next to it, so a simple list is the name in the hieroglyphic text of that decan, and they're in a kind of a sequence, and you know that's a decanal list. They're not all exactly the same because, in a sense, they are constructed depending upon the time the person has been put in the coffin. If you like, they're like a snapshot of the decanal time frame as it existed at the time of death. So the question is then always for this, the living and the dead in Egypt, because all of these texts they always make a point of saying that they're for the benefit of the living and the dead. One way or another, it's not just focus on maybe the living make more use of these things, but the question is, how do you tell the time at night, given that knowing the time and your placement within the frame of space and time is very, very important part of the process of knowing who you are, and also knowing how to kind of come out the other side, as it were. This is the origin of the planetary hours as well, that Jake Stratton-Kent, we mentioned in the early things, was very, very into it. This placing of yourself in space and time, planetary hours, when you construct a ritual, having some notion of the time, and unaware, it's not just looking it up on your watch. There seems to be a preference of kind of knowing it in a kind of cosmic, existential way as well. I say that they were used to measure time, but it also turns out they're not. They do a little bit more than that. They act as kind of magical triggers. These little images that I'm showing now, or almost like an alarm clock that sets off a whole sequence of magical events at a specific moment in the year and in the 24-hour day. So these are put in advance of that moment, and it's almost like they don't literally tick, but they kind of point to a moment when everything is activated. And maybe that's a key thing about magic, that you have to sort of say when it starts, you know, to put a time frame on it. Crowley always used to have these elaborate astrological time stamps, you know, on his diary, you know, when you say star log, whatever it was in Star Trek. So the Egyptians had two such systems, and they all time management. They all use the decanal stars. The earliest was to watch them as they rose on the eastern horizon. Everything rises in the east and sets in the west. So just like the sun comes up in the east, the stars also on a sequence rise in the east and pass overhead. Later in the 20th dynasties, about halfway through, let's say there's about 35 dynasties, more or less. So the 20th is, you know, getting near about 3/4 of the way through, or halfway through, perhaps. They developed a second system, which was based on the observation of the northern constellations, in a way, of the stars, not so much on the horizon, but as they passed overhead. And things passing overhead would, in effect, be part of the northern constellations, the Ursa Major and the Draco, the dragon, and all these other constellations, the hero that never set, but this is in the north. And that being a very, I would say, a very Setian thing, a focus on the northern constellations rather than horizon, uh, is a coincidence, if you like, that later on the revisions that take place in the decanal list are done by the pharaohs of Egypt who had some connection with the Setians. That was the time of the so-called Ramessides, or Ramessids, the most famous of which was Ramesses II, Ramesses the Great, and his father Seti the First. The name Ramesses and Seti, they alternate between father and son across various generations. So if the father's called Seti, the son will be called Ramesses. It's the way it kind of worked in um, that particular family that had this connection with Set. So the change of orientation to horizon to midheaven may well be to do, I think, with the god Set, or Seth, if you like, a bit more modern way of looking at it, who is one of the northern constellations. And the Ramesses were famous for a kind of subtle or secret affiliation with what to some was the demon god Set. So the decanal system measures the rising of a star to mark the beginning of an hour. Right, so a different star rises wherever you're going to view it from, either overhead or culminates overhead or rises on the horizon every hour. It will change as the Earth rotates through the night. Usually it's a single star, as is indicated, though sometimes there might be a little clutch, a little constellation of associated stars, sometimes a triangle, 3 stars, which help to kind of prepare you for the emergence of the main star in one way, might point to it. So looking at that, 12 stars would not be enough to mark all 12 hours. So there's a question about whether they mark the beginning of the hour or the end of the hour and the beginning of the next one. There are 12-hour intervals throughout the night, and there are, of course, 10-day weeks throughout the year. There's a week, what we call a week is actually 10-day period within the Egyptian system, 10-day periods making a lunar month. Each day is divided into 24, 2 lots of 12 hours. As I say, the first and most famous of the decans was Sirius, or Sothis, a star that lies well outside of our modern zodiac, thus proving that the decanal belt is not the same as the zodiac of later times. Not at first. Eventually, they kind of coalesce both ideas. The zodiac is this great band that follows roughly the ecliptic, about 8 degrees north of it and 8 degrees south of it. This band about mostly at the equator, if you like, this notional band, this virtual reality, really. Apart from Orion, which is another famous constellation, but again, not in the zodiac, the decanal band includes Orion, which is mostly a southern constellation. So the Greeks later on, they take this decanal system that had been developed for a long time, thousands of years by the Egyptians, and they have blended it with some of their own ideas and also the Babylonian zodiac. But that's pretty much at the end of Egypt. And that works well, although there's a contention that if you really want to get into Egyptian magic, it would be a good idea to return to the way that they calculated these things, and we might learn something that was hidden otherwise by the transference to this more Greek system, if you like. So there's the Greek system, which has its value, but we could go back to the Egyptian one, and we shouldn't abandon that. There is kind of lost knowledge in a way, if we, that we can recover if we go back to looking at it the way they did. So if this is some sort of clock, as I mentioned, of this cycle of stars rising and falling, as shown in the table, over the course of 36 10-day periods until it covers the entire year, So looking at this diagram, this example, which admittedly, if you're not that familiar with these things, it takes a little bit of kind of guidance to know what one's looking at, really. There are a couple of very significant moments or coordinates built into this table, indicating a date and a time. So looking at the picture, you can see there's a break, or I can tell you there's a break between the 18th and 19th decade, they call it, a decanal period of 10 days. And that is indicated by a kind of gap. You might sort of almost ignore it and think, oh, it's kind of just the foot on or it's the resting point on the coffin. It just happens to be there, but it's obviously been placed there quite deliberately, and it does mark out sort of it separates the 36 columns into two groups, if you like. It divides them in half at a particular moment in the year. And there's another on this as well that are represented four very significant gods within the tradition, which are painted there. They're always painted in one form or another. There's the star goddess Nuit is there, either as a hieroglyphic sign or as a picture of a body in some way. There's the foreleg of the ox, which is a symbol of Ursa Major, or again, a northern constellation of Set. There's Orion, the southern constellation, and there's Sothis, usually represented as a goddess of some sort, of the star Sirius, same thing. There is also another symbol there, which I don't really know what it means. There you go. So there are various ways of determining what time of year, and that would be one way of doing it. But also, if we roughly coordinate these decans to time of the year, I would say that gap occurs pretty much with our January, or might more likely that gap coincides with the winter solstice, when the sun is born. And this would be variations on this, but there's another indication that the magic of the winter solstice and the solstices and equinoxes as well is important within the Egyptian stellar law, and is an indication of it already. So it wouldn't be surprising that this seems to correspond with the solstice. Okay, so the alarm is set sometime for round about the solstice, which would make sense if you kind of think that the person in the coffin or the person doing the ritual is reconstituting, is going to be reborn. So to be reborn at the solstice would also fit greatly with Egyptian mythology of the sun being born at the winter solstice. This is the time when the sun is at its lowest point in the underworld. Stripped as it is of all of its flesh, it's now ready to be reconstituted and reborn. And at this point, an offering spell is made, is triggered. It's written there, and then it becomes triggered by just the process of time. Whether you actually have to be there at that moment, it's going to happen anyway. The way these things work, once you write down a trigger, it activates anyway. That is the activation in its own way. So we know it's at that time of year. What time of day does it trigger? And separating the 6th and 7th hours in the list of decans that is an inscription that flows all the way across. So we've got a kind of crossroads again, right? We've got the crossroads of that I mentioned of going sort of north-south in a way. Now we've got this inscription in between all these stars and everything. There's a line of hieroglyphs, which is in fact a magical spell, and this could easily be overlooked. And here's the spell: an offering. It says a hotep is an offering that is given to Ra, Lord of Heaven, in all his places. May be given bread and beer and oxen, fowl, and all the other good things that you need. And then this same spell, it is, as it says, is the repeated for the foreleg, i.e. for the god Seth in the northern sky, is to be repeated and aimed at the goddess Nuit, the star goddess, is to be repeated for Orion in the southern sky and for the star Solstice. There are various variations on it depending on the coffin. An offering given to the Decans specifically, and it mentions 2 Decans, one in the south and one in the north, the Shamed. An offering which is given to the god who crosses the sky, that's the god Orion, to the upper arm of Orion. An offering which is given to Sothis, an offering that is given to the followers of Sothis, an offering to the 2 spirits and to all the followers of the 2 spirits, an offering to the upper soul and the lower soul, invocation of offerings to you. May the lords of the sky love you. It's the key bit. May the lords of the sky love you. And this list is all the lords of the sky, essentially, which is placed there as an invocation, which is triggered at a specific moment, asking the lords of the sky to love you, to kind of reconstitute and allow you to be reborn. I say the sequence continues for the remaining hours until it reaches a climax. It culminates naturally. So it is added to the coffin in advance of this event taking place. It's a piece of well-known kind of aspect of Egyptian magic known as image magic, using of images to make things happen. That once you construct these images, they always self-activate at the appropriate moment, give or take a few hours. Someone says this fits a known preference for rituals that don't actually require you to get up early to do them. Although we've kind of got into the habit of doing that, but in a way, it's self-activating. Once you've made the intention and made the object and put it there, it's for another operators might not be able to be there anyway, because it's in the depths of the tomb or whatever. But just say if you're doing this as a human operator going through this sort of process, which was done, it will happen naturally, even if you don't actually wake up, because you may have taken a hallucinogen or whatever. But at dawn, you will be woken up one way or another, and the important things will have happened because you set them right. In other words, we can extract quite a good magical technique from the way the Egyptians went about this. Magical hours may not be about the magician having to start a ritual at any particular time, as in the midnight hour. These could often be preset and activate naturally. More of an intention and a strict discipline, and there are all sorts of things that show this is the approach for a lot of people in Egypt, i.e. the spirit of the letter rather than the letter, spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. Intention is always important and underestimated in Egypt, much more than the idea that things have to be precisely so. It often isn't like that. I think then I go back on my notes and sort of more or less brought to it. I was going to sort of say, remind you that the Decans, they bring us back to the idea of demons as well, which is sort of like a proto-astrology. We always kind of think of astrology as always telling us kind of good things to do with your fate, but there's no real reason why these forces should necessarily indicate always the good things, because good and bad things happen to us in the course of our life and in the course of the day. And one explanation of that, especially in terms of illness and moods and all the rest, could be in terms of these entities that are moving around behind the scenes, having this impact on us, and have this demonic shape in the sense they have a shape that is sort of quite intentional, quite symbolic of what they might do for us. I mean, there's the one I like is the two souls, which is a snake with two heads that seem to be pulling in two different directions. And that kind of seems quite an interesting idea, to say that you have this influence of this, I suppose you'd say, indecisiveness of forces pulling you in opposite directions, and that can be personified as a particular demon. Reminding you that in the earlier set of demons, even the SETI, what they call the SETI B family of Decans, that we mentioned in an earlier broadcast, no gods are actually named as such in the way they were in much earlier times. But later on, right, they kind of, even though they described them and don't describe any gods, later on people illustrated these, and in the much later temples you get these quite stunning, elaborate pictures of what these decans actually look like and what they can do. As I say, the names, even though Horus and Set may be named in these lists, but often they're not even named; they're absent. Or certainly the role of famous gods is downplayed in favor of something else. It's more of a naturalistic, technical system, this that we're talking about. As I say, the stars not game, no image of groups of stars occurs either. The much more abstract system that we're working from. Anyway, hopefully, maybe I'll put a few more images to compare that. The Seti's tomb ceiling, if you compare that with, say, the Philae B temple, which is in Philae in Upper Egypt, which is the one I used in my book, because I've kind of compiled a lot of these images together from different times and put it in the book, The Demonic Calendar, along with an idea of how you might use this and the oracles that are associated with the meanings that might be associated with particular moments that these things come along. So rather than being given divine attributes, they're given sort of things like correspondences between different substances like glass or gold or ebony and olive wood are associated with particular decans. So it's quite a modern idea in a way in terms of magic. Anyway, you can find all of this in my book, The Demonic Calendar, which has some parallel as well. So some version of information is given in JSK's book, where he shows this being used in the medieval grimoires, where the decans have these correspondences with certain substances, and you can use certain substances to invoke some of these entities. You can reverse engineer it in a way that there is something in, say, glass and gold that may actually engender some of these ideas. The primary image you find from these later demonic things is always a serpentine energy, which I showed the examples from the magical gems of the importance of serpents and how this all kind of connects with a very old strata of belief within Egypt to do with the serpent power in one way or another. So you have serpents in the sky of one form or another, some of them colossal, some of them grouped together and small. And you also have serpents within the body. So there's a correspondence between the serpents in the body and the serpents in the sky, as they would have seen it, which is how the system pulls together, if you like, how it works as a rational system for predicting things, for healing, or for kind of making sort of divinations and oracles, or just for working your magic. So I think that's probably more than enough, isn't it? I'll reissue all the 4 films together, but linked together so that you get the proper sequence. I'll put a link to the forthcoming book, which includes a lot of this material, somewhere on the timeline. But let's give a last word to Jake Stratton-Kent, who provoked us into exploring this issue in greater detail. He wrote that there's no observable connection between the planetary hours with the planets of astrology. It's a kind of theoretical connection between, this is in later the group, the planetary hours of the grimoires and the actual planets in the sky. You can't really say, because it's this planetary hour, that planet's going to be around. It's a riddle, right? It's all a riddle, which to solve one needs to look at the relationship between the way days and the Egyptian decans, which I hope I've done to show why it's thought of as this cycle of planets or celestial entities and things happening in the body and things happening on Earth in terms of space and time. And as I say, this was a shared interest, and we've gone into, over the course of 4 lectures now. It was obviously important to him. He returned to it a lot of times. I suppose one of the later things, there's a thing called the Testament of Cyprian the Mage, and there's a mage rather, and there's some stuff in there about that. All of the time, he had a good word for it. He called them the gods of time. And in this system, the gods of time are kind of relative rather than absolute. And the origin of this is a repeating daily cycle of planetary hours throughout the year, which, as he knew and pointed us to, was ultimately Egyptian in origin. Originally independent, quite different to the idea of the zodiac that we now use and has taken over, which really only comes in under the Greek influence, if you like. They refined and assimilated, made more precise, but still relative calculations of the kind Greeks were fond of. They like to make things very precise, but what they were measuring was often kind of not there. It's still quite an abstraction. So you can be precise about that, but as with so much Greek innovation, the ultimate source, often unacknowledged, which is a disadvantage, I think, to not really know the origins of these things, was an Egyptian magical technology. And I would argue that in its original form, the Egyptian system was actually closer to reality, the reality of space and time, actually closer to nature. So there you go, Senep T. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another interesting topic from Egyptian magic point of view. The circle of the gods resting in the necropolis are satisfied because you are the great Eye Pet, the hippo goddess, and the guardian of the Big Dipper, who is the god's set.